All right, get ready because today we are going to dive deep into panpsychism.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, you've sent over so much great stuff on this.
Yeah.
Everything from historical overviews
Wow.
to that crazy in-depth Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article. So basically, we're going to explore the idea that consciousness maybe isn't just a human thing.
Right.
It might be everywhere, like woven into the fabric of reality.
Yeah, panpsychism shapes things up, for sure. It really changes how we usually think about consciousness and where it comes from.
So wait, does that mean like my houseplant is secretly judging my interior design choices?
Not exactly.
Okay.
Panpsychism doesn't say that everything has like a fully formed human mind.
Hmm.
It's more nuanced than that.
Uh,
It's not that everything is thinking like we do.
yeah.
More like, imagine the tiniest building blocks of the universe, like electrons, quarks,
Uh-huh.
having a very basic form of consciousness.
Okay, so not quite sentient houseplants planning world domination.
Not quite.
Got it.
Yeah.
But where do we even begin to wrap our heads around this?
Right.
Our Stanford source mentions two main types of panpsychism.
Yeah.
Panexperientialism and pancognitivism.
Right.
What's the difference?
So panexperientialism is the idea that consciousness or the ability to experience anything at all is fundamental. It's like the most basic ingredient in the universe.
Okay.
Even more basic than thought.
Uh-huh.
It's just the potential for any kind of experience or awareness.
So even an electron could have some kind of inner experience.
That's the idea.
Mm.
And then you've got pancognitivism,
Okay.
which says that thought itself is the most fundamental thing.
Mm.
This one is a bit harder to imagine because how can something like a tiny particle have thoughts?
Yeah, it's already mind-blowing to think about an electron having any kind of inner world.
Yeah.
But I was looking through some of the historical stuff that you sent, and this whole idea of panpsychism has been around for ages.
Right.
Like, even the ancient Greeks were into this, right?
Totally. Thinkers like Thales, way back in ancient Greece, were already grappling with these questions. He actually used the analogy of magnets, how they move on their own,
Yeah.
to suggest that maybe they have some kind of mind. It was a way to explore these ideas before we had all the tools of modern science.
It's so interesting how even back then people were trying to understand what consciousness was all about. It makes you wonder if there's something about this idea that just keeps drawing us back to it century after century.
Yeah, there's definitely something enduring about these questions.
So besides Thales, were there any other big names from history who were into panpsychism?
Oh yeah, tons. The pre-Socratics, for example.
Okay.
They spent a lot of time debating whether the mind was fundamental or if it could be reduced to something else.
Hmm.
And then you've got Spinoza
Okay.
in the 17th century. He saw mind and matter as two sides of the same coin,
Interesting.
like two aspects of one infinite substance.
So he was kind of blurring the lines between the physical and the mental.
Yeah, in a way, he was foreshadowing some of the core ideas that drive modern panpsychism.
Wow, so this isn't just some fringe idea. It has some serious philosophical roots.
Definitely.
What about other figures?
Let's see, well, there's Leibniz.
Okay.
He had this concept of monads, which were these fundamental units of reality.
Okay.
And he believed that these monads had a kind of built-in ability to perceive and act,
Huh.
which you could definitely see as an early version of what panpsychists are talking about today.
It's amazing to see those connections between historical ideas and what's being discussed now. So panpsychism wasn't just like a brief fad in philosophy. It seems like it had some serious staying power.
Right, it pops up again and again throughout history.
I read that the 19th century was like a golden age for panpsychism.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The 19th century saw many big names embrace panpsychism.
Wow.
We're talking people like Fechner Wundt James.
Those are some heavy hitters in the world of psychology and philosophy.
Exactly. And they all developed their own unique versions of panpsychism.
So even within this one school of thought, there was a lot of diversity and debate.
Totally. Panpsychism has always been a pretty vibrant and dynamic field.
Okay, so those houseplants might not be plotting against us just yet,
Right.
but it seems like panpsychism has had some serious staying power.
Mm.
What happened in the 20th century? Did this idea just fade away?
Not completely. The 20th century saw a bit of a dip in panpsychism's popularity,
Okay.
but there were still some important thinkers keeping the conversation alive.
Like who?
Well, one of the most influential was Alfred North Whitehead.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that name.
He had a pretty complex system of thought,
Uh-huh.
but one of his key ideas was that even the most basic events in the universe had a kind of rudimentary mentality.
Really?
He used terms like creativity and perception to describe the nature of these events.
Interesting.
So even though the word panpsychism wasn't as popular in the 20th century, Those core ideas were still bubbling beneath the surface.
It's fascinating how these ideas evolve and reemerge over time.
Right. And to really understand panpsychism today, we need to dig into its different varieties
Okay, let's do it.
because it's not a one-size-fits-all concept.
I'm ready to explore those nuances.
Right? Let's dive in. It really is a mind-bending concept. When you think about those varying scales of consciousness,
Yeah.
and to really grasp the scope of panpsychism,
Uh,
we need to break down its different flavors.
okay.
One major distinction is between constitutive and non-constitutive panpsychism.
Okay, I'm ready for another instructive word breakdown. What are we dealing with here?
Think of it this way. Constitutive panpsychism suggests that our human consciousness isn't something completely unique.
Okay.
It's actually built from smaller, simpler consciousnesses.
Okay.
Imagine these tiny building blocks of reality, each having their own mini experiences.
Right.
And somehow they combine to create the rich, complex world of your inner experience.
So it's kind of like a bottom-up approach
Yeah.
to consciousness. Like Legos, each individual brick has its own simple property, but you put them together, and you can create something incredibly intricate and complex.
Exactly. And just within constitutive panpsychism,
Okay.
we find different subtypes,
Okay.
each with its own unique take on how this all works.
Got it.
One example is micropsychism.
Okay.
This suggests that these tiny consciousnesses belong to the tiniest bits of matter, like atoms, or even those subatomic particles we learned about in high school physics.
Wow. So we're talking about consciousness at the level of like quarks.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a pretty wild concept.
Yeah.
What are the implications of something like that?
It raises some really profound questions about how those micro experiences might come together to form something as intricate as the human mind.
Yeah.
That's one of the key puzzles that panpsychists are grappling with.
So it makes you wonder
Yeah.
if there are things about consciousness that we
Right.
don't even have like the language or the concepts just
Absolutely.
to understand yet.
Yeah. It might require us to completely rethink our current framework for understanding the mind. But getting back to those subtypes, another one within constitutive panpsychism is cosmopsychism.
Okay.
This one takes a different approach,
Okay.
suggesting that instead of tiny minds everywhere, it's the entire universe itself that possesses consciousness.
So instead of a bunch of little consciousnesses, we've got like one giant cosmic mind.
Right.
I see how that idea might be appealing to some.
Yeah.
It definitely simplifies things a bit.
Right. It kind of bypasses the whole issue of figuring out how to combine those tiny bits of experience.
Right.
Are you ready for another subtype?
Hit me with it.
All right. This one is called emergentism.
Okay.
It proposes that minds emerge from the interactions between simpler conscious entities.
Okay.
Think of it like individual consciousnesses coming together
Yeah.
and through their relationships and interactions, creating something new and greater than the sum of their parts.
I like that. It's like when you're brainstorming with a group of people
Yeah.
and suddenly an idea pops up that none of you would have thought of individually.
Yep.
There's a synergy that happens when minds interact.
Exactly. And there's one last subtype of constitutive panpsychism to cover.
Okay.
It's called fusionism.
All right.
And it proposes that those micro subjects, when they interact to form a larger mind, don't just coexist, they fuse together.
Okay.
They lose their individual identities in the process and create a single unified consciousness.
So this is a little different from the Lego analogy. It's
Mhm.
more like ingredients that are blended together,
Yeah.
losing their individual forms to create something entirely new.
Exactly.
Okay, so that covers the constitutive side of the panpsychism family tree.
Right.
What about non-constitutive panpsychism? What sets that apart?
Non-constitutive panpsychism takes a different stance.
Okay.
It suggests that human and animal consciousness are fundamental in their own right,
Okay.
not built from those smaller micro-consciousnesses.
Got it.
It acknowledges the existence of consciousness at the micro level,
Uh-huh.
but it doesn't see those as the ingredients for our own minds.
So it's like those micro-consciousnesses exist alongside our own, but they're not directly contributing to it.
Right.
Kind of like two separate streams flowing in parallel.
That's a good way to visualize it.
Okay.
And within non-constitutive panpsychism, we still encounter those familiar ideas like emergentism.
Right. Emergentism says that consciousness can arise from simpler forms without being directly built from them.
Right.
But in our prep materials, you also mentioned something called panpsychism.
Yes.
Is that just a fancier way of saying the same thing?
Not exactly. Panpsychism is a close cousin to panpsychism,
Okay.
but there's a subtle but important distinction.
Okay.
Panpsychism says consciousness is fundamental and everywhere,
Right.
while panpsychism argues that it's actually proto-consciousness that is fundamental.
Okay, time to break down proto-consciousness. What exactly are we talking about here?
Think of proto-consciousness as the ingredients for consciousness,
Yeah.
but not conscious in themselves.
Okay.
It's like the difference between flour, sugar, and eggs. On their own, those aren't a cake,
Right.
but combine them in the right way,
Right.
bake them up, and you've got something delicious.
That's a helpful analogy.
Mm.
But if we're talking about flour, sugar, and eggs as the potential for cake,
Right.
what are the ingredients of consciousness in this pan-proto-psychism view?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's one that even panpsychists themselves debate.
Yeah.
Some believe that we might never be able to fully grasp the nature of these proto-conscious properties.
Okay.
That's the idea of Mysterianism.
So there are limits to what we can understand
Yeah.
about the fundamental nature of reality. It's
Yeah.
kind of a humbling thought.
It is. But it's important to remember that just because we can't fully grasp something right now
Right.
doesn't mean it's not worth exploring.
Right.
There are other interpretations as well.
Right.
One is called panqualityism,
Okay.
and it suggests that these proto-conscious properties are unexperienced qualities that exist in the world,
Okay.
waiting for the right conditions to become experiences.
So they're like dormant potentials.
Yeah.
Waiting for the right moment to blossom into full-blown experiences.
Yeah. You could say that.
It's like a seed waiting to sprout.
Right.
It contains the potential for life, but it's not alive until it encounters the right environment.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this brings us to another key point. The different scales of consciousness that panpsychism encompasses.
Okay.
We've talked about micropsychism, where consciousness is attributed to tiny particles,
Right.
and cosmopsychism, where the entire universe is seen as conscious.
Right.
That's an incredible range to consider.
It really is. And it makes you wonder
Yeah,
if our human experience of consciousness is just a tiny blip
right.
on a much grander spectrum
Totally.
of what's possible.
Yeah. And it begs the question,
Oh, what's the question?
why should we even take panpsychism seriously in the first place?
Yeah. It's not exactly mainstream thinking.
Right, exactly.
What are the arguments that make panpsychism worth considering?
There are actually some very compelling reasons to give panpsychism a fair hearing.
Okay.
One of them is the anti-emergence argument.
Okay, I think we touched on that earlier.
We did.
Remind me what the anti-emergence argument is all about.
It's an attempt to address the so-called hard problem of consciousness.
Right. The hard problem is about how we experience the world subjectively,
Exactly.
how we have feelings and sensations.
Right.
Science can explain our brains, but explaining subjective experience seems like a whole other ballgame.
It really does.
So how does panpsychism help us with this hard problem?
Panpsychists argue that consciousness can't just magically pop out of nowhere.
Okay.
There has to be some kind of foundation for it to build upon.
Right.
They propose that those micro-consciousnesses we talked about might provide that foundation.
Okay.
Instead of consciousness suddenly emerging from non-conscious matter, it's more like simpler consciousnesses combining and complexifying
Right.
to create the kinds of experiences we have.
So it's like a chain of consciousness.
Yeah.
Starting from the simplest levels and building up to the incredible complexity of the human mind.
You got it.
But if that's the case,
Yeah.
wouldn't we expect to see some kind of gradual increase in complexity of consciousness as things get more complex? Do we see that?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it gets at one of the big challenges for panpsychism,
Okay.
which we'll dive into a little later.
All right.
But before we get there, let's explore another argument in favor of panpsychism,
Okay.
the intrinsic nature argument.
All right. Tell me more about that one.
This argument highlights the limitations of physics.
Okay.
Physics is amazing at describing how matter behaves,
Uh-huh.
but it doesn't actually tell us what matter is in itself.
Okay.
It's like having a detailed instruction manual for how to operate a machine,
Mm-hmm.
but having no clue what the machine is made of or what its purpose is.
So there's this fundamental gap in our understanding of, like, the basic building blocks of reality.
Yeah, exactly.
And how does panpsychism come into play here?
Panpsychists propose that consciousness could be the missing piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
Instead of matter being fundamentally inert and lifeless,
Right.
maybe it possesses an inner experience, even at its most basic level.
So even those tiny particles might have some kind of inner world.
Exactly.
That's a mind-blowing thought.
It is.
But it offers a way to understand the essence of the universe that goes beyond just the physical properties and behaviors that we can measure.
Right.
I can see how that would be a powerful concept for some people.
Yeah,
It definitely challenges our usual way of thinking about the world.
for sure.
But I have to ask, are there any good arguments against panpsychism?
Of course.
It still sounds pretty far out there.
There are definitely challenges to panpsychism.
Okay.
One common criticism is simply that it sounds weird.
Okay.
I mean, the idea of an electron having experience is pretty counterintuitive to our everyday way of thinking.
Yeah, for sure.
But panpsychists push back on that, saying we shouldn't dismiss an idea just because it seems strange.
That's fair. Plenty of scientific discoveries probably sounded crazy when they were first proposed.
Exactly. Like the idea that the Earth revolves around the sun or that time isn't absolute but relative.
Right. Those probably blew some minds back in the day.
Yeah, for sure.
It's important to stay open to new ideas even if they challenge our existing beliefs.
Absolutely.
But you mentioned that there was a more serious challenge to panpsychism.
Yes. There's a challenge that panpsychists themselves wrestle with,
Okay.
and it's called the combination problem.
Uh-oh. That doesn't sound good. What is the combination problem all about?
It's the question of how all those tiny consciousnesses, if they exist,
Right.
actually combine to create larger, more complex minds.
Okay.
It's like trying to build a skyscraper out of grains of sand.
Whoa.
How do you get from those tiny individual units to a unified functional whole?
That's a great analogy.
This problem is especially tricky for constitutive micropsychism, where human consciousness is supposedly built from those micro-level experiences.
So it's not enough to just say these micro-consciousnesses exist. Right.
You have to explain how they come together to create something like our own minds.
Exactly. It's like having all the ingredients for a cake, but no recipe for how to put them together.
That does sound like a pretty significant hurdle.
It is.
How do panpsychists approach this combination problem?
There are a few different strategies, each with its own set of strengths and weaknesses.
Okay.
Some panpsychists argue that we might need to rethink our current understanding of consciousness itself.
Okay.
Maybe our existing models are too limited to grasp how those micro-experiences could possibly combine.
So it could be that we're approaching the whole problem from the wrong angle?
Yeah,
Like we're trying to fit square pegs into round holes?
that's a possibility. And there are other approaches as well.
Okay.
Some suggest that the structure of consciousness itself might be more complex than we currently realize.
Okay.
Maybe there are hidden layers of organization that could help explain how those micro-experiences come together.
It's like we need to discover a whole new dimension.
To consciousness to even begin to understand how it works.
Exactly.
But are there any specific ideas about how these micro-consciousnesses could combine?
There are. And that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, so we've got all these tiny consciousnesses, maybe even at the level of subatomic particles.
Right.
And the big question is, how do they combine to
Yeah.
form something as complex as the human mind?
Right.
It sounds like a huge puzzle.
It is. And within the combination problem,
Okay.
there are a few subproblems that really highlight the challenge.
Okay, hit me with them.
One is called the subject summing problem.
Okay.
Imagine each electron has its own mini-movie of experience playing.
Correct.
How do you blend all those individual movies into the single unified experience you have right now?
Right.
It's like trying to merge a million different perspectives into one coherent story.
Whoa. That is a mind-bending thought. It's like asking how a million different points of view can come together to create the single point of view that I experience as me. What other pieces of this combination puzzle are we dealing with?
There's also the palette problem,
Okay.
which focuses on the incredible richness and diversity of our experiences. Think about all the colors, sounds, smells, emotions, and thoughts that make up your inner world.
Yeah.
How can all that complexity arise from a limited set of fundamental conscious properties?
Yeah. It's like trying to paint the Mona Lisa using only primary colors. It
Yeah.
just doesn't seem like enough to create that level of detail and nuance. Is there anything else we need to add to this combination problem?
One more big one, the structure problem.
Okay.
Our brains, even at the microscopic level,
Yeah.
seem to have a very different structure than our conscious experiences.
Right.
How could a physical system with specific, localized parts give rise to the unified flowing nature of our inner world?
So if I'm picturing this correctly,
Yeah.
it's like trying to map the intricate web of a spider's silk onto the rigid structure of a steel beam. They just don't seem to fit together.
So panpsychism has a lot of explaining to do.
Yeah.
If it wants to address these combination problems, where do we even begin to unravel something like this?
Well, some panpsychists argue that instead of focusing on individual microconsciousness,
Oh.
We should be looking at their relationships.
Okay.
Maybe it's the connections and interactions between these entities that give rise to more complex minds.
So instead of like isolated units, it's the network,
Right.
the web of relationships that matters.
Exactly.
It's like a symphony orchestra.
Yeah.
Each instrument on its own might produce a simple sound, but together they create a rich and harmonious whole.
That's a beautiful way to think about it.
It is. And it highlights how much we still don't know about consciousness.
Yeah.
Maybe our current models are just too limited to grasp the true complexity of how these micro experiences could weave together to create something as intricate as the human mind.
It's like we're trying to understand a holographic image by looking at just one tiny point of light. We need to see the whole picture to make sense of it. So where does this leave us with panpsychism?
Right.
Is it a viable theory, or are we just getting lost in a philosophical rabbit hole?
That's the big question, isn't it? Panpsychism definitely pushes us to think outside the box
Yeah,
and question our assumptions about the nature of reality.
for sure.
It forces us to confront the limits of our current scientific understanding and consider possibilities that we might have dismissed before.
I have to admit, this whole deep dive has been a wild ride. It's made me realize how much we still don't know
Yeah,
about consciousness and the universe we inhabit. It's both humbling and exciting.
absolutely. The combination problem is a major challenge,
Right.
but it also serves as a catalyst for innovation.
Okay.
It's driving panpsychists to come up with new and creative ways to explain how those micro experiences could give rise to the minds we know and experience.
So it's pushing the boundaries of our understanding, forcing us to ask deeper questions
Yeah.
and explore new territories of thought. Even if panpsychism doesn't turn out to be the ultimate answer,
Right.
it's expanding our horizons and opening up new possibilities.
Precisely. And that's what makes this such a fascinating area of inquiry.
Yeah.
It's a journey of exploration and discovery that challenges us to rethink some of our most fundamental beliefs about the world.
Well, this has definitely been a deep dive in every sense of the word.
I agree.
Thanks for guiding us through this complex and mind-boggling topic. It's left me with a lot to think about.
It's been my pleasure. And for our listeners out there,
Yeah.
we'd love to hear your thoughts on panpsychism. Is it a crazy idea or a glimpse into a deeper truth? Let us know what you think.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep those minds open to the endless possibilities of the universe.